Part 1. January. Cath. The house is tiny, but impossibly pretty and impeccably presented. It's on the end of the terrace with 2 bedrooms and the original Victorian road sign, St. John Street, still attached to the facade. The agent smiles as she opens the door, knowing she has a treasure to show them.
"It's been completely renovated," she says. "New boiler, new roof, new wiring."
Cath is hardly listening, her eyes straying from the sash windows to the little fireplace with its tiled surround. To the right, beyond a wooden staircase, the kitchen gleams. She feels a rush of pleasure.
"We've had a lot of interest," the agent is saying now. "A lot." She pauses. "Do you know the area?"
"We live between here and Fulford," Jim says.
"Oh, not far then."
The agent smiles again, a little less certainly.
"Downsizing?"
"No," says Cath. She hesitates. Now they're here, she doesn't like to think of this as a commercial transaction. Her mind is filling with the past, not the future. She turns to her husband. "Imagine, Jim, we could have started out in a house like this." "Davies Lane wasn't so different," he says. Cath shakes her head. The house in Leytonstone, with its crumbling plaster and threadbare carpets, felt like a palace at the time. But what a difference it would have made if they'd ripped off the flock wallpaper, polished the floorboards. All that putting up, making do. That's what they've always done, isn't it? But she wonders now whether a pretty white-walled house like this one might have set them on a different course. Whether they might, perhaps, have steered more safely around the dangers they had no idea back then that life had in store for them. When Emma was little, Jim used to tell her the story of his and Cath's first meeting. Wrapped in a towel after her bath, she'd snuggle against him, warm and sweet-scented, and say,
"Tell me about in the beginning, Daddy. Tell me again."
"I was covering the Lord Mayor's show," Jim would say. He had a special voice for this story, his Jackanory voice, Cath called it. "I was taking photos of the parade, and I saw a face peeping out from one of the floats. The prettiest face I'd ever seen, with dark, dark eyes." By the time she was 5, Emma knew the story by heart.
"Queen Anne Boleyn," she'd say. "She was dressed as Queen Anne Boleyn, wasn't she, Daddy?"
She was, in green velvet and a jewelled headdress, with pearls around her neck. Cath's school had been chosen to take part in the parade because it had some link to the livery company, whose master was Lord Mayor that year, and Cath, the newest recruit to the teaching staff, had been nominated to play Anne Boleyn to the head's Henry VIII. She hardly remembers the parade now. It's been eclipsed by constant retelling. "I was leaning out of the window," Jim would say, "and when I saw your mummy, I nearly fell right through it. I sprinted downstairs and followed her float all the way through the streets of London, and when they reached the end of the route, there I was."
"There you were,"
Emma would smile, a sleek, satisfied smile.
"And there she was."
"She was even more beautiful close up," Jim would say, "but I was a mess. I'd started out a mess, and 2 hours jogging through the streets hadn't improved things." He'd pull her face then, miming sweat and dishevelment. "Luckily, I had my biggest camera round my neck, and I told her I wanted to take some photos for my piece." Cath had always hated having her photograph taken, an irony for someone who was about to find herself marrying a photographer. But she'd been flattered. She hadn't met many men like Jim. Hadn't met many men at all, in fact. She'd been to a girls' school, then a teacher training college filled with women. And the only men on the staff at the primary school in Redbridge, where she'd landed her first job, were the head and the caretaker. At 22, she'd been about as sheltered as it was possible for a London born and bred girl to be. So she'd said yes, to the photographs, and to the drink he'd suggested in almost the same breath. A little pub in the back streets of the city, where she'd peered through the gloom at this man in a grubby t-shirt and scuffed jeans, and felt as though she'd slipped into another world, almost as strange to her as it would have been to Anne Boleyn. They'd walked up Cheapside, past St. Mary le Bow, and Bread Street and Gutter Lane, and seen the dome of St. Paul's emerging from behind the plate glass planes of merchant banks, and the November sun sinking in audacious technicolor, pink and purple and orange. The Lord Mayor's Show was a commission for a news magazine that folded the following year and never published Jim's photos, nor, indeed, paid him for them. Lucky I got a different reward for that day's work, he'd say to Emma, tucking her up in bed and resisting her pleas for the next bit of the story, the bit she appeared in. But he was working mainly for the New Musical Express back then, and he'd talked, casually, dazzlingly, to Cath about his work, about guitarists and labels and recording studios, while she cast about for a single interesting anecdote from the staff room. Mr. Copperfield, the caretaker, played in a ceilidh band, but she knew as soon as she mentioned it that it was the wrong sort of band, the wrong world for Jim Polkinghorne. He'd smiled, though, amused by her embarrassment, and said, "I love all that folk music." And at that moment, Cath had known she couldn't help herself. She was going to fall in love with Jim, whether she liked it or not. As they climb the stairs of the tiny house, that day floats through Cath's mind, at one moment barely more substantial than the wisp of voile at the bathroom window, and the next crystallised, cemented into something with all the vivid solidity it merits as the first building block of their marriage. Their own personal creation myth. Anne Boleyn, divested of her green velvet, wandering the city streets with this worldly wise man who had taken an inexplicable interest in her. She smiles at him now. Her smiles are more pinched, more scarce these days, but Jim's response gives no sign of that. "Do you like it?" he asks. "It's perfect." "Easy to let, I agree." He turns, looking out over the little patch of garden with its spiral paved patio. "Should we make an offer then, if the sums add up?" Cath doesn't reply at once. She wants to own this house very badly, but she has a sudden sense of apprehension, a presentiment almost tangible in the hush of the double-glazed bedroom. It's as if she's giving up her last wish, she thinks, as if letting this house be her heart's desire means that everything else she longs for will never come to pass. And there's something else that matters much more than this house. Something that looms so large that the rest of life is flattened against the edges of the room. Something she'd give anything, everything, for.